Hey everybody, this is John from Rock My Bean, and I'm going to be doing a series of reactions and reviews to some of the greatest rock albums ever made. Now, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I can tell you that the music at that period of time was incredible. The 70s in particular was renowned for the fact that there was an enormous variety of music. That there's a lot of experimentation going on that came out of the 60s. And while rock and roll originally originated from R&B and from even country music, and particularly music from various people living in the South and different parts of the country, rock and roll in the 70s began to acquire other forms of music added to it, such as jazz and classical influences and chorale influences. And so the 1970s, I think, produced, in my view, some of the best rock music ever made, ever performed. And in that period of time, I was actually a teenager. So you know how important it is to a 15-year-old to listen to his music. And music was central in our lives. And this generation had divorced themselves from the music of previous generations. So my folks listened to, Glenn Miller and Frank Sinatra. My grandparents probably listened to just radio music, popular tunes of the era. But rock music differentiated my generation. I'm considered the tail end baby boomer, early Gen X, from the previous generations. And so rock music was young in the 50s. In the 60s, it began to find its voice. By the 70s, there was a great deal of willingness to go in new directions. And the music industry at that time was very unique. They were willing to let bands take 2 or 3 albums to come up with a sound or a style that was their own, that was successful, was marketable, that people wanted. And because of this freedom in the industry and this desire to experiment, we had some amazing music and amazing artistry in those times. And some of the greatest rock or music albums ever made come from that period. So I'm 62 years old. I was a teenager in the 70s, 20s in the 80s. Probably the best time for rock music ever. There just hasn't been a time before or after quite as, not only as good, but the amount of variety and quality is just incredible. And no two bands were alike. Now, you may find influences from band to band. You may find that some artists said, we like what they did. We're going to include a little bit of that in ours, but we're going to take it a step further. And then you had bands that would just start off completely fresh. And the music industry didn't know what to do with these groups. So they would say, well, they sound like them or they sound like them. But standing back now, all these years later, we can tell that these bands actually were explorers and pioneers. They were not necessarily copying. And if they were taking the very best that they were listening to and taking it a step further. And that's what bands like Led Zeppelin and Queen and Rush and many others did during the 1970s. I'm going to cover some of the greatest albums ever done. Now, to those of you who are younger generation, perhaps you're a millennials or a Gen Zs, and you want to get into the music of this period, which is very unique, very special, and you will never find a time like that since. I grew up with this stuff, and I know this music like the back of my hand. And I'm going to go through these albums and these songs and tell you and relate to you. If you grew up in this time, you're going to understand where I'm at, how important these songs were to us, and when I hear a song, what kind of memories it brings back. Because as you all know, music can bring back memories like that have been dormant for decades. And this stuff especially. So I'm going to try to put you back into my time, and to you younger people out there, what it was like, what we were thinking about, what we were doing. When we heard a song, what was it that we were doing at the time? How did we react to this music, and what did it mean to us? And I'm going to tell you as a musician, because I've been a drummer for 50 years. I've played in bands, playing a lot of different kinds of music. And so I have practical musical experience as well. And I can tell you, I'll talk about the drummers and the guitar parts and everything else, because I'm well acquainted with this kind of music, not only from listening to it, but from playing it for 50 years. I started playing drums in 1970 when I was 10 years old, and I'm 62, so I've been doing this a very long time. So we're going to start off with the very first album here, and it is called Rumors by the band Fleetwood Mac. Now, Fleetwood Mac was was new in the 70s, and it was named after Mick Fleetwood and McVie, the bass drummer, the bass guitar player, the drummer, the bass guitar player, Fleetwood Mac, Mick Fleetwood and McVie. And McVie's wife came in to sing, and then they brought two others, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, and they just made the band what it became, very, very special. Well, in the 1970s, they put out 11 albums, and this was their 11th album, and it was called Rumors. And there's not a single song on this album that's bad, that is a clunker or doesn't belong. It's one of those albums that just everything went right. The songs were well written, the musicianship was excellent, the production quality was off the charts, and everything was just top shelf. And each one of these songs, if you grew up in this period, reminds you of something you were doing or thinking at the time. So we're going to start out, we're going to listen to whole albums. And the reason we're listening to albums is because in those days, people, albums were everything. When a band put an album together, a lot of times they were thinking about trying to get each song to work with the next song. So you would go to the record store, buy a record, go home, open up the record, look at the cover sleeve, all the photographs, all the lyrics were in front of you, and you would put the needle on the record, put your headphones on, your stereophonic headphones, and you would just get lost, and you would listen to the whole album like a whole piece of artwork connected, all the songs. And that's how we're going to approach these albums in terms of album quality. You see, today we just look for an MP4 and download it to our phone or whatever it is and listen to it. There's no larger reality that the music is a part of. And I can remember these albums as whole entities, not just single individual songs. But we're going to go song by song, and then we're going to cover different albums. And I hope you'll join me on this trip, on this adventure, because music is magic. And we're going to listen to some amazing magic right now. I recommend this to people my age, to relive what you went through, and to young people who are looking for great music of the past. And where do I start, and who do I listen to? Well, let's begin with Fleetwood Mac and their album Rumors. And the first song on that album, the first song is Second Hand News. So here we go.
I know nothing to say. Someone has taken my place. When times go bad, when times go rough, won't you lay me down in the tall grass and let me do my stuff? I know got nothing on you. I know
Wow. Okay. And that was Secondhand News, the first song off the album Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. What I loved about this is the way it just starts off on a high. I mean, dun 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 dun. You want to dance to it. But it's very minimalist in a way. There's no roaring guitar. There's no big some layered fills of music. It sounds like you're playing a acoustic guitar and one drum with the snares off, a little cymbal. It's almost like you got a little tiny street band, and it has a very minimalist feel, but it's bouncy and it's fun. And one thing about Fleetwood Mac is they had incredibly good vocal harmonies. And you have Lindsey Buckingham playing his very unique guitar and guitar style that nobody else did. And he played with his fingers. He didn't use a pick. And he's playing that guitar like nobody's business. And he's singing. And he's a great voice. And then there's Stevie Nicks singing the harmonies with him. And it's just an amazing little song. It's a little song, but it's big in its fun quotient and its joy quotient. And this song reminds me of just being young and free and having fun. It's light. It's just great fun. And it's a great way to start a great album. They did a great job choosing this as the entry level into the rest of the album. And this is a sign of great things to come because it just gets better and better after this. Well, that's the first song on this album. I hope you've enjoyed this review and this reaction. I'm just loving this album. I can't wait to do some more. If you're of my generation, you know how important these songs were to us. And if you're younger, this is where you want to be. This is a good place to start your adventure. And I'll take you on a magic carpet ride through rock and roll of the 1970s and 80s, some of the greatest music ever written. This is John from Rock My Bean. I'll see you again next time.